Hello, I'm Raymond Shadow. Imagine this. You are incredibly lucky to be chosen by a reality show for a chance to spend a whole day with your longtime idol. Sitting across from you is the flawless icon you've been infatuated with for years, while a room full of cameras and crew members anxiously hover around to capture the moment. In your heart, he has always been a shimmering, unblemished god of the stage. Just a split second before the clapperboard snaps and the cameras roll, this idol suddenly stands up and, with a hint of apology, asks if he can first go to the fridge to grab a carton of yogurt. Flattered and overwhelmed, you quickly nod and tell him to please go right ahead. He walks over to the fridge, takes out the yogurt, sits back down across from you, and amidst the chaotic noise of the crew prepping, he does something you will never forget for the rest of your life. This very idol, the one you look up to day and night, the one who provides you with all your spiritual strength, slowly peels back the lid of the yogurt. Then, with absolute naturalness, he brings that foil lid to his mouth and sticks out his tongue to lick the yogurt stuck to it. In that exact moment, it hits you like a ton of bricks. This flawlessly packaged superstar, who seemingly exists above the mundane world, is actually just an ordinary person who covets that little bit of yogurt on the lid. I call this highly dramatic yet incredibly authentic and grounding instant the yogurt lid moment. Starting from this very point, let's dive in together to uncover a psychological truth, which is also the root cause of all our self-doubt and mental friction. We are going to peel back the superficial layers to explore where a person's solid sense of self-worth deep down truly comes from. If modern science could somehow extract self-worth, bottle it up in exquisite glass vials, and sell it as a pill, it would be a revolution. I can guarantee you that it would absolutely be the most sought-after and expensive panacea on the face of this planet. When you take a step back to examine the staggering, jaw-dropping disparities in real-world achievements between different people, you notice something fascinating. You'll find that this chasm-like divide is actually very difficult to explain away simply by looking at a difference in IQ. Countless pieces of sociological evidence have shown us that intelligence actually accounts for a microscopically small percentage of those astonishing gaps in success. What truly pulls people apart and widens that distance are often the things that simply cannot be quantified. Achievement is usually much more about your imagination, and whether you have the ability to shatter the hard ice of conventional thinking when you are backed into a corner. It's about whether you have the audacity to dream of a better world amidst absolute ruin, and whether you have the inner confidence to take control of complex, chaotic situations. And a sense of self-worth seems to be hidden somewhere deep within these exact traits. Because a person with a high sense of self-worth will firmly tell themselves when facing the unknown, I can handle this, and I rightfully deserve to be the one making the rules here. But sadly, this kind of underlying confidence isn't something we are born with. Our class background quietly sets the tone for it during our childhood. One of the massive, hidden pains of coming from a lower-class family is that it often implants a deeply rooted sense of powerlessness within you. Growing up in that kind of environment, you subconsciously feel that the world is entirely controlled by other people. Your life script is simply to struggle to adapt to the rules they have set, and to cautiously navigate around the countless obstacles they have placed in your way. You might pick up a lot of street smarts and survival wisdom, but a certain thought has likely never even flashed across your mind. That thought is the realization that you actually have the right, and even the power, to directly tear down the very obstacles blocking your path. In stark contrast, the typical upbringing in a middle-class family subtly instills a completely different sense of reality. Through the trivial moments of daily life, they make their children feel that this world is built and altered by people exactly like you and me. This underlying cognitive logic exponentially boosts a person's sense of self-worth from a young age. It will very likely dictate the exact stance and posture you take when you face the world later in life. Just imagine for a second if you happen to have an uncle holding a key position in a core government department, or a distant cousin who works at the Ministry of Finance but is incredibly annoying in person. Your entire perspective on social power and how reality actually operates would be completely flipped on its head. Because you wouldn't be able to help but think, if even these perfectly ordinary, charisma-lacking people I've seen awkwardly standing in the kitchen at family dinners can exert such a massive influence on the world, then what's stopping me? Naturally, it means I am just as capable of doing the same. So, a huge part of our self-worth actually stems from how we measure the distance between ourselves and others. Fortunately for us, modern technology has done us a massive favor in this process of demystification. The internet and social media have provided us with far more opportunities to observe those so-called authority figures up close. You start to feel much closer to these big shots when you see them making typos on Twitter, having moments of emotional breakdown, or even realizing that their decision-making on massive issues like starting wars is sometimes less thoughtful than your own daily choices. These are all their very own yogurt-lid moments playing out in public. Instead of destroying our faith in humanity, these moments actually provide us with a tremendous sense of psychological relief. Let's trace things back to the very beginning of life and think about how we initially perceived and built our worldview. When we were first born, we were incredibly frail, restricted to lying in a crib and looking up at the towering adults who surrounded us. In our infant eyes, those grown-ups were practically omnipotent gods who could do no wrong. They possessed unimaginable strength, effortlessly throwing a ball over the highest treetops, and they spoke in complex, indecipherable languages. Faced with these colossal beings, we felt as insignificant as ants. Every single one of us, in the early stages of life, occupied this absolute subordinate social class where we had no choice but to look up at the adult world. But do you remember that bizarre, almost surreal sense of dislocation from your school days when the fourth wall was suddenly broken? It's that moment on a random weekend when you were strolling through the supermarket in casual clothes, calculating what snacks to buy. Then, suddenly, as you rounded a corner, you bumped straight into your usually stern, unsmiling French teacher standing right there in front of the colorful cereal aisle. In that exact split second, the scene unfolding before you felt completely surreal. Mr. Gregory, of all people, was actually pushing a shopping cart to buy cereal just like anyone else. That unapproachable majesty belonging to the lecture podium instantly crumbled, and you suddenly realized that this absolute authority figure was just a regular guy who needed to fill his stomach. This beautifully validates the yogurt-lid theory once again. We spend our entire lives constantly chasing, processing, and trying to confirm this seemingly basic concept, that a certain somebody, at the end of the day, is ultimately just a human being. But what's both fascinating and a little tragic is that even though we've intellectually known this truth for a long time, it never quite sticks. Whenever we manage to catch a glimpse of that fragile human weakness in someone else, we still instinctively feel a fleeting sense of shock. Why is it that this shift in perspective is so deeply bound to our inner sense of self-worth? The reason is that every single one of us suffers from a fatal, built-in information asymmetry. We are eternally cursed to know ourselves from the inside out, navigating through our own raw, unfiltered, and unpolished thoughts. But at the very same time, we can only ever know everyone else from the outside in, solely through the carefully woven social masks they choose to wear. Other people will only ever show us the heavily curated version of themselves, the specific angles they desperately want the world to see. This results in a catastrophic imbalance in the data we hold in our hands. In the dark, lonely corners of our own minds, we experience endless bouts of madness, cowardice, and gloom. Yet, we foolishly mistake the calm exteriors of the strangers walking down the street as proof that they are effortlessly maintaining composure, reason, and nobility at all times. Any person with even a shred of self-awareness, provided they are truly honest with their own heart, knows this struggle. They will readily admit that fully accepting oneself in the deepest recesses of the soul is an incredibly difficult, agonizing task. This is because our brains are constantly flashing with absurd, profoundly embarrassing, and even downright twisted thoughts every waking second. If a machine were invented that could publicly broadcast the live commentary running through our heads, we would probably die of social humiliation on the spot. But having these thoughts flickering in our minds doesn't mean we are morally bankrupt or depraved. It merely exposes the glaring fact that in our social interactions, it is incredibly hard for us to candidly admit to the rawest, most unrefined psychological states of being human. Even though we've invented countless channels and digital tools to share the data of our lives in modern society, true vulnerability remains rare. That's why those late-night, guard-down confessions between intimate partners or best friends still bring about a shocking, overwhelming sense of relief. Imagine being slightly tipsy and tentatively asking your new friend if they've ever had those weird, unspeakable thoughts that you can't share with anyone else. When their eyes go wide and they excitedly reply, "Yes, absolutely, I totally get it, I have those too." It's pure magic. The intimacy that flows between the two of you in that fleeting second is utterly unparalleled. It reassures us that even though we might be a little bit strange, we are certainly not alone on this spinning rock. On the walk home from school, kids constantly can't help but complain to each other about how incredibly weird their own families are. Then, you go over to your classmate Billy's house, watch his mom bring out a tray of freshly baked cookies, and you instantly assume his family is the absolute gold standard of normalcy. You might carry a bit of resentment, wondering why everyone else's parents can remain so emotionally stable while your own family is always so neurotic. But as time goes by and you truly step into the adult world, you'll realize that Billy's family wasn't normal at all. Beneath every seemingly glamorous roof, there is a chaotic mess hidden from view. The only reason you thought they were perfectly normal was because your status as a guest hadn't granted you the clearance to see how crazy they act once the doors are locked. Our understanding of others is forever stuck at the polished, window display level that they willingly allow us to see. Consequently, we consistently develop a kind of survivorship bias, feeling as though the people closest to us are somehow more unreasonable than the strangers outside. This absurd prejudice is practically everywhere you look in romantic relationships and marriages. Men clinking glasses in pubs will helplessly vent about how women are completely irrational, while women rolling their eyes at a brunch gathering will sigh over how utterly impossible men are. If you could somehow jump out of this prejudiced fortress, you'd want to run over and scream at them, "Wake up, this has absolutely nothing to do with gender." As long as you zoom in close enough, you will find that every single soul is a little sick. The only reason we hold such beautiful, flattering filters for people and things far away from us is simply because we possess the privilege of not knowing them well enough. This privilege acts like a sheet of bubble wrap, preserving a tiny sliver of naive fantasy for us within a harsh, unforgiving reality. You can feel the sheer power of this filter with crystalline clarity when you go on a long journey. People return from a trip abroad and always sigh with lingering fascination, exclaiming that the Greeks truly understand how to live, or that the deep-seated confidence of Americans is just so incredibly charming. But the moment you actually pack up and move to that country, integrating yourself into the grinding gears of that society, the filter shatters instantly amidst daily friction. You will quickly discover that people all over the world are agonizing over rent and mortgages, and everywhere you go, you'll find the exact same petty squabbles and cynical calculations. Yet, distance creates beauty, and the human psychological defense mechanism desperately needs these illusions to make daily life bearable. It's just that as the physical and psychological distance between you and another person closes in, those carefully concealed character flaws are inevitably dragged out into the spotlight. The frustrating reality is that even the most intimate partner in the world could never understand you as thoroughly and intimately as you understand yourself. There exists an unbridgeable chasm between your internal reality and their external perception. The sheer volume of internal information you receive about yourself every single day is millions of times greater than what anyone else can observe. You witness your own hesitations before every microscopic decision, watching your self-denials bounce back and forth like a ping-pong ball in ultra-high-definition slow motion. Let's say you just spot a pair of shoes you like at the mall. Instantly, a frantic, dramatic tug-of-war stages itself inside your head. You agonize over whether you should buy them, worrying if your budget for the next 2 weeks will explode, convincing yourself to walk away, only to have the image of those shoes haunt your vision the moment you step out of the store. You might even find yourself tossing and turning in the dead of night, staring blankly at the ceiling until 3 a.m. just because of those shoes. When you wake up the next morning and see the dark circles under your eyes in the mirror, you'll feel like an absolute lunatic for letting such a trivial, stupid thing ruin your precious sleep. This kind of petty, ridiculous internal monologue is so embarrassing that you wouldn't even dare mention it to your partner over breakfast. Staring at yourself from the inside out is exactly like gazing into an abyss. It is a profoundly disorienting experience that can easily make you lose your way. Have you ever noticed that if a person stays in an isolated, cut-off environment for too long, their mental state will uncontrollably slide toward madness? When you steep yourself in the vacuum of pure solitude for an extended period, certain thoughts that were originally insignificant will start spreading wildly like untamed weeds. Your mind will imperceptibly drift toward dangerous extremes, and the scariest part is that you won't even realize it's happening while you're trapped inside. This is exactly why, from the very depths of our genetic code, we harbor such a desperate craving for the companionship of others. We need people around us, even if it's just to gently tug on the fraying kite string in our hands over the most trivial matters. Friends will interrupt you right when you're spiraling down a rabbit hole, using a casual joke to tell you that your current train of thought is getting a little deranged. Not only do they define us through these daily interactions, but they invisibly provide a secure anchor for our otherwise teetering mental worlds. Beyond that, the gaze of others can actually grant us a highly compact and concrete sense of self-awareness. When you are completely alone, zoning out in the middle of the night, you don't really feel like a functioning member of society with a specific name and identity tags. You just feel like a formless ball of chaotic consciousness floating aimlessly through the universe. You become like a massive, boundless dream catcher, constantly trapping stray thoughts and impressions scattered in the air, lacking any boundaries or a tangible sense of your life's narrative arc. But the moment you push open the door and walk into a noisy crowd, someone will point at you and say, "Look, that's so-and-so, the guy who is exceptionally good at fixing messes. Ironically, that slightly caricatured, roughly labeled version of you in the eyes of others actually provides you with an immense sense of security. Because that external, stick-figure sketch makes you realize that, in the minds of others, you are actually a remarkably simple soul with beautifully clear outlines. This bestows upon us a cohesive sense of narrative, allowing us to rediscover our coordinates amidst the fog of our own self-loss. When others look at you, they see a complete physical vessel with facial features and limbs, looking wonderfully harmonious and unified. Yet, deep within your own interior, you don't feel that whitewashed sense of order whatsoever. Your inner landscape is often a vast, formless wasteland where termite-like thoughts blindly crash into one another. This massive rupture between external perception and internal reality is the absolute perfect breeding ground for imposter syndrome to grow wildly. In an era that demands us to be relentlessly excellent at all times, this crippling mindset of feeling like a fraud is spreading like a virus. The world places impossibly high hopes on you, and even if you've proven your competence countless times over, you will still lie awake in the dead of night terrified that you are finally going to be exposed. Undeniably, imposter syndrome has brought deep agony and mental exhaustion to countless brilliantly talented people. But if we look at it from a slightly unorthodox angle, whenever I learn that someone is enduring this specific psychological torture, I actually heave a quiet sigh of relief in my heart. Because this is precisely the ultimate proof that you still hold a moral bottom line and possess a remarkably high degree of self-awareness. Those truly irredeemable frauds and villains never wake up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. worrying if they are fakes. So, if you occasionally panic about whether you're just a phony riding on dumb luck to deceive the world, take comfort in it. It proves that you are inherently sincere down to your bones, which is an incredibly rare and valuable starting point within the dark, murky forest of human nature. It's exactly like how a driver must first lucidly accept that their driving skills are terrible before they can grip the steering wheel tightly and avoid speeding on the highway. While this sober realization won't instantly turn him into a racing god, it will absolutely help reduce the odds of a fatal crash to some degree. Since admitting our imperfections and insecurities is a great starting point, what should we actually do to part the fog and clearly figure out what kind of potential and hidden cards we really hold? The answer actually carries a kind of clumsy but sturdy pragmatism. You just have to go out and physically collide with this hard, unforgiving world. Without genuinely getting your hands dirty, making mistakes, and hitting brick walls, you will never discover in which blind spot your true talents are hidden. We all experience this magical intuition in certain fleeting moments of life, a sudden realization that we simply find certain tasks easier to pull off than others do. Those legendary tennis players, upon hitting the sweet spot of the racket for the very first time, must have felt the undeniable call of destiny vibrating right up through their arms. A writer, when accidentally typing out a beautifully crafted sentence, will also feel a secret thrill inside, thinking to themselves that the phrasing is genuinely delightful. This tiny, almost unshareable sense of accomplishment is very often the very first embryonic form of self-confidence taking root and sprouting. A fulfilling, richly textured life does not demand that you torture yourself into becoming some omnipotent, all-around warrior. It only asks that you go on a treasure hunt to find those specific things that you not only can do, but can do with absolute, effortless grace. If someone were to point at my face right now and mock me for being a clumsy, uncoordinated idiot on the tennis court, I wouldn't feel the slightest bit humiliated. That's because I have never felt any kind of calling for my talents in that particular domain anyway. But if it's in the realm of stringing words together, the very craft I rely on to survive, I can acutely capture that empowering sense of being totally in my element. Admitting your own incompetence is never a disgrace. Channeling all your energy into those tiny sweet spots where you naturally shine is the ultimate, highest-tier wisdom of adulthood. One of the greatest enigmas of life is figuring out how a person can successfully navigate through the thick fog to find their true calling. I sometimes visualize this searching process as someone desperately trudging across a mist-shrouded wasteland, sweeping a metal detector back and forth over the ground. As you walk, the detector will occasionally let out a faint but urgent series of beeps. That sudden surge of intense interest and hyperfocus is the universe reminding you that a crucial fragment of your true self is buried right there in the dirt beneath your feet. That radiant, complete version of our original self was perhaps shattered a long time ago during the agonizing process of growing up. Those fragments have been buried deep by the pressures of exams, grueling jobs, and secular prejudices, scattered far and wide across an infinite wasteland of mediocrity. And our ultimate mission in this lifetime is to follow those faint, fleeting audio cues, dig those pieces out of the mud, and painstakingly piece them back together. For every young person standing at the crossroads of life, there is no question more suffocating than asking yourself what on earth you are supposed to do with your life. This is actually an incredibly serious, existentially heavy philosophical proposition. Because unless you are that 1 in a million lucky bastard handpicked by the gods, you have to manually glue together your own vision of the future, piece by piece. A majestic voice isn't going to suddenly boom down from the sky, directly announcing that you are destined to be an actor or a ski instructor. All of this depends entirely on you fumbling in the dark, reconstructing the original you through the endless rearrangement of those shattered pieces. You are like an archaeologist excavating the ruins of your own soul, requiring radar-like sensitivity to any microscopic signals of interest. And among all the emotional signals we receive, envy is actually a highly misunderstood but incredibly reliable navigation device. People always mince their words when talking about envy, treating it like a shameful, unpresentable emotion. But have you considered that other people's glamorous lives are simply reflecting the true, suppressed ambitions within yourself? Stop running from envy like it's a plague, and instead treat it as a precious clue leading straight toward your own salvation. Settle down and carefully dissect what specific traits of that person you are actually envious of, even when you grit your teeth thinking you're jealous of a superstar singer or a wealthy entrepreneur. If you hit pause and think deeply, what makes your eyes burn with envy is absolutely not their exhausting, non-stop, burnt-out lifestyle. Peel back that superficial layer of vanity, and you might be utterly shocked to find that you don't covet their fame or their bank accounts at all. What you truly care about and yearn for might simply be the liberating freedom they have to create tangible things with their own two hands. Or perhaps what you subconsciously envy is merely the fact that they have the financial confidence to live in a secluded wooden cabin far away from the noisy crowds. Therefore, the most mature and delightfully counterintuitive attitude to have toward envy is to use it as a signpost pointing toward your true personal ambitions. Do not look at it as moral evidence that you are inherently narrow-minded or destined to be a petty villain. Envy is a mud-stained key, and when you are lost and completely bewildered, it can help you unlock the door leading directly to your most authentic desires. On this arduous path of exploring the abyss of the self, we constantly have to grapple with countless negative emotions. Laziness is an unavoidable part of that journey, but interestingly enough, laziness is also sharply divided into good and bad varieties. Lying on the couch guilt-free on a Sunday afternoon with no alarm set, watching a mind-numbing comedy show, is a perfectly good kind of laziness that genuinely recharges your soul. But if you are mechanically scrolling through short videos while a profound sense of self-loathing bubbles up from the bottom of your heart, that's a different story entirely. When you clearly watch the better version of yourself being swallowed up inch by that glowing screen, that is the bad kind of laziness coated in a bone-chilling guilt. What we must do within this complex coordinate system of emotions is to face ourselves with radical honesty and retrieve that lost anchor point. When your internal imposter syndrome is infinitely magnified against an already fragile sense of self-worth, it easily mutates into a deafening roar of self-criticism that feels like a nitpicking tyrant living inside your brain. And to make matters worse, when external criticisms come crashing down on us like a torrential downpour, how are we supposed to cope? No matter how thoroughly put together and respectable you appear as an adult right now, when someone mercilessly points out your faux pas at a dinner party or a massive blunder at work, you crumble. That sharp, piercing sting will instantly tear down all your emotional defenses. The truth is, even a person with the most robust psychological defense mechanisms in the world struggles to remain perfectly stoic when something they deeply care about is rejected. But what induces a far deeper despair are those utterly valid, completely inarguable criticisms leveled against you. You genuinely did mess up, and you irretrievably committed an incredibly stupid mistake. That agonizing, heart-piercing pain defies all description and plunges you into profound self-doubt. To survive this, we must learn the grueling lesson of self-forgiveness and lean on true friendship as a spiritual crutch along this lonely road to redemption. We desperately need those absolutely trusted listeners, the ones to whom we can reveal our ugliest scars without a single reservation. From ancient times to the present day, humanity has always harbored an instinctual, burning desire to confess outwardly and seek absolution. We need to confess our wrongdoings under the warm gaze of someone deeply affectionate, just so we can hear them reply with gentle reassurance. We need them to say, "I know you did a terrible thing, but I still believe that you are fundamentally good at heart." This incredibly complex, profound twist within the soul is something no human being can ever accomplish entirely on their own in isolation. This is exactly why absolute, unadulterated loneliness so frequently drives people to the edge of the abyss. It's because we are simply incapable of conjuring up enough self-compassion out of thin air to keep ourselves moving forward. If we were incredibly lucky during our childhoods, we might have been deeply gazed upon by an unconditional, unreserved kind of love. That specific kind of gaze ensures that even when we make catastrophic errors, we remain firmly convinced that our original intentions were good. It might sound like a trivial detail, but it actually constructs the very protective shell we use to fend off the harsh storms of the outside world for the rest of our lives. Passing on this gentle privilege to others by truly listening to their confessions is the hidden force that keeps the entire machinery of human society running. It is exactly as if we all chipped in together to establish a massive, communal humanity goodwill fund. I deposit my forgiveness into the vault today, and you deposit your compassion into it tomorrow. Then, when we find ourselves on the verge of a breakdown in the dead of night, we all have the rightful clearance to withdraw just enough courage to keep living. We find ourselves stranded in overcrowded modern cities with hundreds or even thousands of contacts sitting in our phones, yet a deep-seated loneliness in our souls spreads like a plague. It is one of the most chilling, terrifying secrets of human existence. Because when you are sobbing your eyes out at 3 a.m., teetering dangerously on the edge of mental collapse, the truth reveals itself. You scroll frantically through your phone, only to realize there isn't a single number you can call without feeling like a burden, just to beg for a drop of non-judgmental forgiveness. This tragic dilemma of having absolutely no one to confide in seems to manifest with particular brutality among men. Our social culture has sculpted masculinity into a mirage suspended in midair. It is not a naturally growing state of being, but rather an exhausting achievement that must be constantly, aggressively proven. Just think back to the most vicious insults hurled by little boys on the playground. They point at their peers and sneer, "You're acting just like a little girl." Hiding beneath this playground cruelty is a bizarre, utterly ridiculous chain of contempt. Sitting arrogantly at the very top is this so-called manliness, while down at the very bottom lie all those severely devalued feminine traits. If you aren't tough enough, or if you accidentally let slip even a single drop of vulnerability, you will slide irreversibly down that slippery slope straight into the abyss. A man spends his entire life frantically teetering on the edge of this identity, tiptoeing around to maintain that ridiculously fragile shell of toughness. It is a highly volatile psychological state that forces men to wear a heavy mask and swallow every ounce of their terror and powerlessness right down into their guts. In my eyes, the men who truly radiate a captivating, magnetic glow are almost always the ones who have been completely obliterated by life and then drag themselves back up from the ruins. This is because a cruel and merciless fate did them the favor of stripping away that hypocritical suit of armor. When they crash into rock bottom and realize they can't simply tough it out anymore, a shift occurs. They finally get the chance to drop the toxic arrogance of the strong man, and reach out for help like a helpless child in the dark. It is only when a man can openly and peacefully accept his own powerlessness and brokenness that he truly shines with the brilliance of humanity and profound empathy. But tragically, far too many men spend their entire lives running themselves into the ground just to uphold that exhausting, defensive posture. You can actually spot the people who have been truly tempered by life's fire with a single glance in a crowded room. They exude a deep, unmistakable humility, and when you talk to them, you can palpably feel an expansive, cavernous emotional depth. When they smile and ask you how your weekend was, it never feels like a perfunctory, throwaway pleasantry. You can actually feel that their simple greeting contains a massive, accommodating space ready to hold whatever you say. Even if you were to answer that your weekend was so devastating you wanted to end your life in the bathtub, they would be able to catch you steadily without flinching. In sharp contrast, when some other people ask how you are doing, you can almost sense their subconscious, desperate need for your weekend to have been absolutely delightful. That's because their own internal emotional landscape doesn't have a single crack left to accommodate your negativity. Many men will passionately cry out online, demanding that the world offer men more safe spaces to reveal their vulnerabilities. But the heavy irony is that when another man in real life actually dares to bare his soul to them, they instinctively squirm with intense discomfort. They fiercely desire the world to gently embrace their own tears, yet they are completely paralyzed and at a loss when faced with the tears of another man. They might even retreat behind their keyboards and type out cold, mocking, and cynical remarks in secret. This incredibly asymmetrical psychological misalignment makes the path to male mutual support agonizingly difficult to walk. From the perspective of evolutionary psychology, ancient hunting alliances desperately needed stoic, unbreakable companions, because a weak teammate could literally bring about catastrophic annihilation. But in this modern society where we no longer face wild beasts, this brutal genetic instinct has morphed into an invisible, suffocating curse. If you genuinely want to cross this chasm and seek out a little bit of warm connection in this freezing world, you must force yourself to stare your cowardice dead in the eye in the mirror. You have to not only learn how to drop your disguise in front of others, but also be brave enough to pay the emotional bill for that goodwill fund. We need to talk about a word that makes everyone feel deeply ashamed yet is tragically omnipresent: bullying. As long as you've attended school or been part of any small clique, you have absolutely witnessed that cruel behavior of exclusively preying on the weak. However, the true essence of bullying is often not just about dominating the helpless, it is frequently a twisted, vindictive retaliation against emotional privilege. Those bullies, covered head to toe in defensive thorns, are usually using extreme measures to punish people whose lives appear so much softer and more loved than their own. Imagine a child who grew up constantly fighting for survival in a cold, harsh, and unforgiving household. When he sees another classmate receiving gentle comfort from the teacher just for forgetting a pencil, or when he spots the lovingly prepared bento box from that kid's mother, a storm brews inside him. What rises in his chest is absolutely not just mere envy, but a roaring inferno of jealousy mixed with bitter indignation. He screams internally, "Why must I live my life like a blooded, battered warrior while you get to confidently parade your softness around without consequence?" To vent this explosive resentment toward an unfair fate, he decides to personally puncture that soft, protective bubble and force the other person to taste the brutal cruelty of life. What is truly blood-curdling is that this dark urge to bully can even be secretly passed down generation after generation within families, right between parents and their own children. This is quite possibly the most unspeakable, shadowy underbelly of being a parent. It happens when you have fought tooth and nail to build a loving, tolerant sanctuary for your child that is 100 times more comfortable than anything you ever had. You watch them innocently basking in those emotional privileges that you once desperately thirsted for but could never attain. And then, in a moment of sheer exhaustion, an uncontrollable, haunting resentment might suddenly wash over you. You subconsciously catch yourself envying your own children, jealous that they will never have to endure the agonizing scarcity and struggles you once went through. You find yourself resenting the fact that they are entitled to cry their eyes out over something as trivial as a broken toy. But immediately after, that very thought plunges you into an even deeper, darker pit of self-loathing. You feel horrified that you are actually resenting the beautiful life you worked so incredibly hard to secure for your own flesh and blood. You feel profound shame for harboring such bitterness, and then that very shame twists into endless anxiety and agony. It's exactly like an infinitely nesting black hole of emotion. You are quite literally the hero who severed the toxic chain of generational trauma. You manage to light up that long string of previously dim, broken fairy lights, yet you find yourself drowning in a swamp of self-denial simply because the electrical current burned your fingers in the process. There is no greater sorrow in being human than this. We try desperately with all our might to do every single thing right. We yearn to repair those shattered pieces of the past, yet in the process, we inevitably step on another invisible landmine. All the bitterness and malice in this world is, in reality, just one incredibly sorrowful game of hot potato. People accumulate far too much indigestible agony in their hearts, and unable to find an exit, they morbidly package this pain into malicious gifts to force upon the next innocent passerby. We extract a delusional sense of control through sadism, foolishly trying to extinguish the nameless fire in our own hearts using the tears of others. Person A steals person B's shoes, so person B goes and smashes person C's window, and then person C turns around and breaks person D's arm. This twisted transaction of pain has no end. In a society where everyone is walking around with bleeding wounds, if someone tells you their greatest dream in life is simply to be an ordinary person living a quiet, obscure life, that is a spectacular achievement and a sign of incredibly rare psychological health. Conversely, those who possess a pathological thirst for fame, acting like lunatics to shimmer under the gaze of countless strangers, often harbor gaping, unhealable ulcers in their souls. This impulsive, burning desire to stand in the spotlight is actually an extreme overcompensation for the profound sense of invisibility and neglect they endured during childhood. If you grew up never knowing the steady, secure feeling of being consistently paid attention to, the damage is done. You will thrash around exactly like a drowning person, desperately trying to cling to any tiny piece of driftwood that can prove you actually existed. Becoming the undisputed center of the universe turns into your one and only antidote against that secret, consuming terror. Those brilliant comedians who exhaust themselves just to earn a laugh from the crowd almost always come from childhood soaked in quiet tears. They use joke after joke as a chisel to slowly, painfully carve out a narrow crevice of survival within an otherwise suffocating predicament. But when you finally become an adult confronting the traumas of your past, true liberation comes from asking yourself, do I still need these protective colors right now? I once had to turn myself into a desperate, people-pleasing clown just to survive in this freezing, ruthless world. But if I try to be just a little bit more serious right now, even if I'm no longer the funny guy, will the sky really come crashing down? If I once believed I absolutely had to claw my way to the top and be seen by everyone just to validate my own existence, what happens now? If I choose to step back into the shadows today and quietly embrace that obscure mediocrity, will I still make it out alive? If I used to habitually belittle myself and aggressively dim my own light just so I wouldn't attract the destructive envy of others, things need to change. What would actually happen if I tried a different way of living today, and allowed myself to unleash my talents to the absolute fullest? These questions act as the critical plot twists in the script of your life. They are the grueling interrogations of the soul that we must face head-on throughout our long adult years. You have to understand that the survival strategies you were forced to evolve in childhood just to keep yourself safe have outlived their purpose. Today, those very mechanisms have likely transformed into an airtight net, ruthlessly strangling the infinite possibilities you possess as a grown adult. That perilous, primitive environment of your past, the one that required you to walk constantly on thin ice, vanished a very long time ago. It is exactly like that profoundly illuminating quote from the famous comedian Marc Maron. He said that in order to protect the fragile little boy inside him back then, he personally created a ferocious, terrifying monster. But now, that very monster has grown so colossal that even he can no longer control it. Next, we are going to talk about an even more secretive and agonizing psychological state, and that is status anxiety. This kind of anxiety is like a slow-acting poison, stemming directly from our deep-seated, almost greedy hunger to be seen. It's that voice screaming, "Look at me standing right here, look at how undeniably special I am, and look at the spectacular achievements I've pulled off." No matter how many books you have read, or how utterly transcendent you believe your spiritual practice has become, you are not immune. As long as you remain entangled in this web of society, that burning impulse to be needed by important figures and praised by the people you admire will follow you like a shadow. Throughout the long, sprawling history of humanity, this colossal desire to be the focal point of the universe was actually properly housed and managed by religion. The most soothing, comforting aspect of religion is that it constructs a supposedly omniscient, infinitely attentive ultimate observer for its believers. In those traditional belief systems, even a single strand of hair on your head has been carefully numbered and accounted for by the divine. This implies that within this vast, freezing universe, there is a towering, magnificent presence looking down at you every single second of the day. He isn't just watching you, he understands you completely and cares for you profoundly, exactly like the most flawless parent imaginable. If a child happens to grow up in a loving, healthy household, the treatment they receive in the first few years of their life is virtually identical to that of a global superstar. When he pushes open the door to the living room in the morning and casually hums a wildly off-key nursery rhyme, magic happens. The adults will literally drop whatever they are doing to cheer and clap for him, and in that exact second, he is the undisputed center of the entire world. Being enveloped in this infinite, unconditional spoiling doesn't actually turn a child into a selfish, endlessly demanding monster. On the exact contrary, that suffocating sense of entitlement and pathological neediness almost always stem from a profound emotional deprivation in early childhood. An adult who can comfortably and peacefully enjoy an ordinary life draws their core confidence straight from having their emotional privileges fully satisfied during childhood. If a child has fully experienced the ultimate, intoxicating satisfaction of being the center of the universe in the beginning stages of life, they are set. Then, when they step into adulthood and face a harsh world that absolutely refuses to revolve around them anymore, they won't break. They will be able to carry a calm psychological resilience, peacefully accepting their own insignificant, marginal position within the gigantic machinery of society. But look at those people who must be the center of attention wherever they go, perpetually exhausting themselves to prove their own importance. That arrogant, overbearing posture is actually just a heartbreaking psychological overcompensation. It is absolutely not a sign of robust inner strength. Therefore, the ultimate mission of a perfect childhood is not to mold you into some superhero destined to alter the course of human history. It is meant to endow you with a deep, grounding energy, allowing you to accomplish an even greater feat throughout your long life. That grand feat is the ability to peacefully and quietly accept your own mediocrity after experiencing all the chaotic noise of the world. Accepting this mediocrity is a grueling process of psychological shedding, because ultimately, every single one of us is marching toward a rippleless, ordinary end. During this painful transition, the very first thing you must learn is to completely stop feeling ashamed of your own ordinariness. You must acknowledge the hard boundaries of your abilities, and you have to genuinely accept the undeniable fact that you, just like everyone else, will eventually reach the very end of your life. A friend of mine once let out a sigh and shared a deeply profound observation. He said, "I don't think I've accumulated quite enough wisdom yet to profoundly enjoy the simple things." When it comes to confronting our own happiness, we modern people act exactly like the absolute worst, most snobbish accountants imaginable. We have set our accounting threshold so absurdly high that we only begrudgingly agree to record a moment of joy in our ledgers if it's monumental enough to shock the world. We demand the universally adored wedding ceremony, or the glorious moment your band finally steps onto the main stage of a top-tier music festival. We wait for your startup to ring the bell at the NASDAQ, only to be acquired by a massive conglomerate for an astronomical sum. Aside from these colossal milestones worthy of a highlight reel, any other microscopic bit of joy doesn't even qualify to be jotted down in our books. We treat the tiny, fragmented pleasures of our daily routines as if they were some kind of unpresentable, counterfeit currency. Imagine if someone spent the entire day buzzing with excitement simply because they had a phenomenally delicious cup of coffee that morning. Or imagine them tearing up with genuine emotion just because they caught a glimpse of a breathtakingly colorful sunset on their commute home. We would almost certainly mock them in our heads for being overly dramatic and sentimental. We would secretly speculate about just how utterly impoverished and miserable this person's life must be if they are getting this worked up over something so incredibly trivial. We always operate under the delusion that the actual value of happiness must be directly proportional to the grand scale of the event causing it. But the brutal truth of reality is that a long human life is absolutely not cobbled together from those painfully rare moments of glory. Instead, it is painstakingly built, brick by brick, from countless insignificant flashes in time, exactly like sipping coffee or watching a sunset. The overwhelming majority of your time on this earth is filled with these exact mundane details that a calendar wouldn't even bother to mark. Since that is the case, why couldn't a seemingly tiny moment contain a profoundly grand sense of salvation? Very often, I actually develop an absurd sense of guilt simply because I feel things far too deeply when it comes to minor occurrences. I will feel a wave of inexplicable shame just for being deeply moved by a tiny, passing detail. It feels as though admitting I derive immense pleasure from these trivialities is equivalent to exposing to the entire world just how small and pathetic the scope of my life truly is. But perhaps we have had this fundamental logic completely backward from the very beginning. The true metric for judging whether a soul is genuinely rich might not be based on how many earth-shattering, legendary experiences they have accumulated. Rather, it depends on whether they possess the magical ability to cultivate the most bountiful crystals of joy out of the most barren, palm-sized patch of dirt. Hidden right here is an incredibly lucrative psychological dividend. The moment you deliberately lower the threshold for experiencing happiness to the absolute floor, everything changes. Not only do you reap an exponentially multiplied sense of joy, but far more importantly, you gain the ability to possess it right here, right this very second. Between these two opposing attitudes towards life, which one actually represents a truly awe-inspiring kind of strength? Is it the person who can only manage to squeeze out a faint smile while standing at the center of the universe amidst deafening roars and extravagant flattery? Or is it the one who requires nothing more than a hot cup of tea and a gentle breeze to ignite a raging carnival deep within their soul? The answer speaks for itself, yet we constantly behave with blind, foolish conformity when it comes to this exact issue. We are just like a flock of mindless sheep, easily led around by the nose by societal weather vanes whenever we try to judge what is actually meaningful and valuable. We have practically lost our ability to independently evaluate the importance of things, devolving into a mindless chorus of cultural parrots. If you are standing in an art gallery and someone points to a painting, whispering that it's a priceless masterpiece that once hung in a king's bedroom, you react predictably. Even if we can't make sense of the scribbles on the canvas, we will instantly put on an enraptured expression and endlessly gasp at its supposed otherworldly beauty. But if we were to face that exact same painting without knowing the artist's name or its astronomical price tag, things would be wildly different. We probably wouldn't even give it a second glance, perhaps muttering under our breath about what kind of trash we were looking at. This completely brainless submission to social authority is nothing short of absurd. This phenomenon is an absolute plague in the cultural sphere. Before a book wins a major award, everyone constantly complains that it's painfully obscure and deadly boring. Yet the very second it gets slapped with a shiny gold sticker from a literary committee, absolutely everyone stays up all night writing overly emotional essays about it on their social media feeds. The words inside the book haven't changed one bit. The only thing that shifted is our easily manipulated, desperate sense of vanity. Let me give you an example from my own personal experience regarding the act of flying on an airplane. I am actually someone who is deeply obsessed with flying. I absolutely love the sensation of weaving straight through the clouds. I am infatuated with cold aviation technology and completely mesmerized by the mechanical beauty of the wings trembling against the rushing slipstream. But I often find myself deeply perplexed as to why, in today's social evaluation system, staring at clouds from an airplane is perceived as lacking any cultural depth. When compared to visiting a swanky art gallery to look at paintings, looking out an airplane window sits squarely at the very bottom of the chain of contempt. If you hold up a glass of red wine and tell your friends that you plan to spend the weekend admiring postmodern paintings at a museum, the reaction is predictable. Everyone will cast approving glances your way, thoroughly convinced that you are an individual of impeccable taste and noble spirit. But what if you excitedly declared that you plan to buy a plane ticket, open the window shade at 30,000 feet, and just stare intensely at the clouds for hours on end? What if you told them you want to wholeheartedly marvel at nature's uncanny craftsmanship and experience a visual shock 100 times more profound than a Da Vinci masterpiece? You can easily guess their reaction. They would probably think you're an uncultured country bumpkin making a huge fuss over absolutely nothing. The passenger next to you might even glare at you impatiently, aggressively demanding that you pull down that damn window shade because the glare is ruining their view of a mindless in-flight movie. The incredibly romantic act of watching the world from tens of thousands of feet in the air becomes cheap and unworthy of mention simply because it lacks a socially assigned artistic halo. This is just one tiny microcosm, but it perfectly maps out just how cowardly and incompetent we are when it comes to defining our own sense of meaning. True creativity, or rather true freedom of the soul, requires possessing an unquestionable, ironclad conviction deep within your heart. You must firmly believe that as long as something brings you genuine joy, it possesses absolute legitimacy and rationality, regardless of how absurd it appears to the secular world. If you happen to have a weird, eccentric hobby of collecting broken rocks from the side of the road, then go collect them boldly. This is your completely unique, personal carnival, and you do not need a single art critic's rubber stamp to validate it for you. If you simply love watching the 3 p.m. sunlight hit the blinds or cast irregular shadows across a rough concrete wall, embrace it. Let that specific beam of light be the greatest piece of art in your life, and to hell with the world-famous paintings. Interestingly enough, this unpolished, raw kind of aesthetic confidence is frequently displayed to absolute perfection in young children. This is exactly why adults are so frequently and deeply moved by the pure, unfiltered vitality that children effortlessly radiate in certain moments. If you take a toddler to the park, your original plan might be to head straight for the playground to push them on a fun-looking swing. But you will very quickly discover that the two of you might not even get within 50 feet of that swing. This is because the child might suddenly freeze like a statue halfway there, completely captivated by a crumbling brick wall. Or perhaps they've just discovered a dried-up, spat-out piece of chewing gum wedged tightly into the crevice of a dirty rock. In your adult eyes, this is nothing more than meaningless urban trash, and you just want to drag them by the arm toward the swing you have deemed meaningful. But they remain stubbornly squatted down on the pavement because they've found a single blade of foxtail grass defiantly poking out from the concrete cracks. In his own universe, he is the absolute, independent arbiter of meaning, totally unburdened by social experiences dictating what is good or bad. Yet tragically, the moment this deeply spirited child turns 15, everything is completely ruined. He will begin actively observing which music his classmates are constantly discussing, eagerly investigating who the coolest pop star on social media is, or obsessing over the brand of sneakers some influencer is wearing. Through this agonizing process of being disciplined by society, they hand over their most precious right of aesthetic judgment to an illusory phantom known as the masses. It is a dreadfully tedious process of socialization, and the tragic part is that not a single one of us can escape it. But if, after enduring all of this and entering an era of true mental maturity, you can somehow claw back that eccentricity and maverick spirit, everything changes. You will absolutely become the kind of adult who naturally radiates a dangerously magnetic attraction in any crowd. These individuals possess a deeply comforting sense of relaxation, casually shrugging and saying, "Who cares what anyone else thinks? This is just the weird stuff I happen to love." This sheer courage to return to your authentic self is equally applicable to our everyday social interactions. I constantly observe friends who are preparing to host dinner parties, and they almost always spiral into an absurd level of mental exhaustion during the process. The moment they decide to invite a few close friends over for a meal, a highly complex, Michelin-star melodrama immediately begins playing in their heads. They sink into a pathological anxiety, tearing their hair out thinking they absolutely must prepare an exquisite appetizer, like expensive melon paired with imported prosciutto. They convince themselves they need to cook up some complicated shrimp dish, followed by a deadly serious main course event like roasting a French spring chicken. Finally, they insist there must be a beautifully plated dessert, ultimately torturing themselves into an absolute frenzy with all this unnecessary red tape. But if you were to walk up to them in that exact moment, stare right into their eyes, and ask them what they actually enjoy eating alone without all the pretentious rituals, the truth comes out. They might awkwardly rub their hands together and admit that their favorite thing is to simply pop open a cheap can of tuna. They'll tell you they just dumped that lump of meat straight onto a plate, scoop out a massive dollop of hummus, and lazily dip crackers into it. Then, they kick their feet up comfortably on the coffee table, happily eating while zoning out to some mindless soap opera. Since this is the absolute most relaxing and joyful way for you to eat, why on earth can't you just entertain your best friends in this exact same manner? Why must you strap on the suffocating shackles of the perfect host just to forcefully play a character you don't even recognize? You have to trust that the very moments that make you feel genuinely comfortable down to your core are highly likely to easily touch someone else's heart, too. Strip away that fake, exhausting sense of refinement, and your gathering will undoubtedly erupt with an unprecedented level of vitality and laughter. This concept is actually completely identical in essence to the exact things that historically great, immortalized artists have done throughout time. Those souls standing proudly at the very peak of the artistic pyramid all possess a fiercely robust intuition and unwavering confidence. They firmly believe that the specific elements that give them an emotional climax absolutely carry the immense potential to ignite the rest of humanity. It is precisely this unapologetic exposure of self-confidence that breathes life into those mind-blowing, magnificent masterpieces. The true core of all great art is simply one person having the audacity to boldly redefine and reclaim their own happiness on behalf of the entire world. The great thinker Ralph Waldo Emerson once left behind a wildly romantic yet piercingly accurate aphorism regarding this. He famously noted that in the minds of geniuses, we are constantly shocked to recognize the very thoughts we once ruthlessly discarded ourselves. The so-called geniuses of the world are absolutely not some alien species with abnormally wired brains. The fleeting ideas flashing through their heads are actually no different from the random thoughts that pop into our own minds while waiting at a red light every day. The single, glaring difference between them and us is that they possess a terrifying amount of guts, daring to take these seemingly insignificant, absurd thoughts entirely seriously. They have the courage to carefully cup these broken fragments in their hands, bestowing upon them supreme dignity and meaning. And this is exactly what the vast majority of us lack. Therefore, when you open a truly soul-touching, monumental book, you have a visceral reaction. You often find yourself violently slapping your thigh, screaming wildly in your head, "My God, I have always thought exactly this, but why couldn't I ever figure out how to say it out loud?" What kind of family of origin or background does it actually take to endow a person with such massive underlying confidence to simply validate the thoughts in their own head? I imagine it must be a sanctuary overflowing with gentleness and tolerance, where parents look at their slightly eccentric child and offer total support. They say, "Go do what you love, even if it looks bizarre to the outside world. In this house, we will never treat you like a freak." This is a deeply quiet, nourishing kind of acceptance that allows a person to fiercely defend their unique joy without having to become sharp, defensive, and quick to anger. This immediately reminds me of that highly specific, awkward unease we all feel when standing face to face with fine art. Compared to how we mercilessly and instantly hit the like button on a song in our music apps, we appear so incredibly timid and cautious inside an art gallery. We constantly catch ourselves using our peripheral vision to peek at the little plague next to the painting, trying to guess whether the piece is supposed to be melancholic or joyous, utterly terrified of displaying the wrong emotion. Regarding the absolute origin of painting, ancient Greece offers a profoundly captivating and heartbreaking legend. A young shepherd boy fell deeply in love with a shepherd girl, but she was destined to depart on a long journey the very next morning. On their final night together, the two of them hid away inside a dimly lit cave. The flickering firelight cast the girl's silhouette against the rough rock wall, and the boy silently picked up a piece of chalk to trace the outline of her shadow. According to the myth, this became the very first painting in human history, laying bare the most primitive impulse behind all artistic creation. It is the sheer, suffocating despair we feel when we realize that something unimaginably precious is about to fade away, and we frantically try to pin it down. You can view every single piece of art in the world as differently shaped buckets, filled to the brim with the shimmering fragments that the creator desperately tried to salvage from the river of time. The fundamental reason we need art at all is because our clumsy, human hands simply cannot grasp the slipping sands of time. So, we are forced to outsource the safekeeping of those fleeting, beautiful moments to a canvas or a block of marble, letting them hold onto the memories for us. This perfectly explains why you find yourself so profoundly moved by certain, highly specific pieces of art. It is because hiding inside those works is often the exact spiritual homeland your soul aches for the most, yet finds impossible to hold onto tightly. Speaking for myself, I have an intense preference for paintings with minimalist compositions, massive amounts of negative space, and an air of cold, restrained beauty. But if you were to take a look at my actual, day-to-day life, it is nothing short of an endless, chaotic battlefield of absolute turmoil. The very reason I am so deeply infatuated with that specific kind of tranquil art is exactly because it represents the peaceful shore my heart yearns for but struggles the most to reach. It acts like a heavy anchor sitting right in the middle of my living room, constantly reminding me amidst the wreckage not to forget my true spiritual home. But why is it becoming increasingly impossible for modern people to just sit quietly, even if it's merely to spend a few brief moments alone with the thoughts in their own heads? We always seem to be whipped violently forward by a relentless, unstoppable sense of busyness. The truth hiding behind this is quite brutal, because being completely alone with yourself requires a monumental amount of raw courage. When you finally close your eyes and block out the noise of the external world, all the sorrow, regret, and terror you've deliberately suppressed will instantly rush in like a tidal wave. To escape this suffocating, unbearable self-interrogation, we willingly sacrifice ourselves at the altar of entirely meaningless, trivial tasks. This perfectly explains why the carriage of a moving train, or standing at a sink running warm water while doing the dishes, so often become the ultimate breeding grounds for sudden inspiration. The telephone poles flashing by outside the train window, or the delicate soap suds covering your hands in the sink, provide just the right amount of microscopic external distraction. This faint, gentle interference acts as an emotional shock absorber, quietly soaking up the excess anxiety swirling deep within our hearts. It finally gives us the courage to slightly loosen the floodgates of our defenses, allowing those truly valuable, buried thoughts to drift to the surface. The ultimate tragedy of modern society is that we have stretched our front lines of effort far too thin. Before the Industrial Revolution, a baker would knead the dough in the morning, watch it slowly rise, and then sell the freshly baked loaves by the evening. Within a mere 24 hours, he could obtain a fully closed, beautifully clear loop of complete accomplishment. But today, we are violently crammed into massive institutions of thousands of people, where everyone is grinding away on projects that might take 5 or even 10 years to show a single result. Our lives now feel exactly like a chaotic soccer match being played on a pitch that is 5,000 miles long. There are 25 soccer balls rolling around simultaneously, 18 different goals set up, and absolutely no one has a clue when the final whistle is actually going to blow. We have become utterly lost inside a gargantuan, sprawling maze completely devoid of any immediate feedback. This grueling, endlessly tedious tug-of-war can very easily push you right to the terrifying edge of an existential crisis on some random Sunday evening. You might suddenly find yourself staring blankly at the ceiling, asking yourself what on earth you are doing and why you are trapped inside this miserable shell. But the truth is, an existential crisis is actually a magnificent gift wrapped in incredibly ugly paper. It is a profound, uncompromising audit of the soul, coldly reminding you that most of the so-called helplessness you suffer from today is simply a hallucination you've forced upon yourself. And buried underneath all this dizzying, blinding busyness, we have tragically missed out on far too many of those faint, fleeting little thoughts. Plato once beautifully compared the human brain to a massive aviary, violently fluttering with all sorts of birds that represent our fleeting thoughts. The ultimate challenge of philosophy is figuring out how to coax the fastest flying, quietest chirping birds to land safely right on the tip of your finger. Socrates was revered as a profound sage precisely because he possessed the ability to openly and peacefully admit his own total ignorance. Picasso, while watching children wildly scribble in his twilight years, once sighed and remarked that when he was young, he could paint as flawlessly as any Renaissance master. Yet, it took him an entire, agonizing lifetime to relearn how to paint with the uninhibited freedom of a small child. Dropping that decaying, outdated map in your hands and permitting yourself to retreat back to a state of innocent, pure ignorance, that is the very pinnacle of wisdom. We constantly over-idealize this world, especially when trapped inside a fanatical culture that endlessly preaches that sheer effort alone can alter your destiny. If a society aggressively brainwashes you into believing that all your success is fiercely earned, and all your failure is solely because you simply didn't work hard enough, a trap is set. Within this airtight, impenetrable logical loop, failure mutates into an unforgivable sin that aggressively nails you to the pillar of shame for all eternity. This perfectly explains why in places that fiercely worship elitism, people's mental defenses are usually exceptionally fragile, and suicide rates tend to remain terrifyingly high. Because when you inevitably mess things up, the entire society will point their fingers at your face, cursing you as a complete loser, leaving you with absolutely zero room to shift the blame. In stark contrast, the slightly tragic, fatalistic worldview held by the ancient Greeks actually appears far more compassionate and forgiving. They firmly believed that fate was a highly temperamental goddess holding the ship's wheel. When she was happy, she would toss endless riches your way. But if she woke up in a foul mood, she wouldn't hesitate to flip your tiny boat over into a raging storm at a moment's notice. If you choose to view life as nothing more than the goddess of fate casually flipping a coin, you will gain a profound sense of peace regarding failure, and a deep reverence toward success. Just think of the Stoic philosopher who had his legs broken and was thrown into a death row dungeon. Facing his friends' weeping sympathy, he simply spoke with absolute calm. He said, "Just look at the first 50 years of my life. The goddess of fate let me enjoy the ride for so long, and now she has simply run out of chips." True Stoicism does not teach you to turn into an emotionless rock that refuses to yearn for a pair of healthy, working legs. Instead, it teaches you to sprint as fast as you can while you still have two legs, and to hop forward with peaceful acceptance when you are left with only one. The adults of our current era have entirely lost the miraculous ability to play with the unbridled, reckless joy of a child. We have been utterly terrified out of our wits by the omnipresent threat of consequences and heavy prices, to the point where we aggressively calculate the ROI even when we dream. The absolute best way to shatter this suffocating fear is to follow the piercing advice of the great French philosopher Michel de Montaigne. To hell with all authority figures and flawless idols. In this world, whether you are a high and mighty king or an unfathomably deep philosopher, the truth remains the same. Even if they are perched atop a magnificent golden throne, they still have to squat over a toilet and take a shit every single day. Use this seemingly vulgar but incredibly authentic toilet confidence to brutally puncture the hypocritical halo surrounding these so-called great figures. Those indestructible heroes you idolize are, in reality, just pitiful humans who ruthlessly sacrificed every other part of their lives just to achieve staggering success in one incredibly narrow field. If you strip away that dazzling, glamorous filter and look closely at them, you'll see they are actually a group of deeply sick patients walking around with massive black holes in their hearts. Just imagine how horribly invisible and internally hollow a person must feel to obsessively, frantically chase after such illusory wealth and status like a raving lunatic. When we turn this critical, flaw-seeking gaze toward modern romance, the entire situation becomes infinitely more absurd. Online dating apps are quite literally the cruel meat grinders of our era, unconsciously implanting an incredibly toxic hallucination right into our brains. It tricks you into believing that all the chaos, screaming, and messy reality of love simply exist because you haven't matched with the mathematically perfect person inside some gargantuan database. It aggressively encourages you to smash the unmatched button at the very first sign of minor friction, so you can smugly swipe right to open the next mystery box. This is an utterly cold-blooded logic that treats breathing, living human beings as nothing more than cheap, disposable consumer goods. If you swipe away 800 supposedly subpar candidates in a single day, are you truly just filtering out the bad fits? No, you are actually using a narrow, bitter lens to ruthlessly slaughter 800 vibrant, living universes that could have potentially formed a profound bond with you. Over time, you will inevitably sink into a deep moral paralysis, because you know deep down that you are judging people in a horrifyingly cruel manner. Simultaneously, you will be paralyzed by the terror that you, sitting right there on that freezing digital shelf, could be swiped away like literal garbage by someone else at any moment. We always demand a ready-made, perfectly tailored soulmate handed to us on a silver platter. Yet we completely forget that in any genuine, intimate relationship, profound chemistry and compatibility are never the entry tickets. They are the hard-earned loot you acquire after fighting monsters together over long, grueling years. If we constantly harbor these delusional expectations while refusing to offer even a single shred of patience for the painful breaking-in process, we are doomed. It is exactly like throwing a tantrum because you want to be a world-renowned, breathtaking flutist, yet you adamantly refuse to practice your basic scales for even 10 minutes a day. The current social climate absolutely loves violently slapping all sorts of dangerous, red alert warning labels onto everyone. If you act even slightly emotional, people will immediately jump up and diagnose you with borderline personality disorder. If you act selfishly for a brief moment, they will not hesitate to permanently staple the hat of a malignant narcissist right onto your head. But if we strictly abide by this draconian, mind-sweeping standard, then every single human being on Earth belongs in the garbage can, including yourself. Our absolute greatest enemy in love has never been the infuriating character flaws of our partner. Rather, the true enemy is our hyper-defensive posture, always ready to draw swords, combined with that sickening moral superiority of always feeling deeply wronged. When two heavily scarred souls finally collide, the most heartbreakingly beautiful moment is when they drop all their shields and speak with absolute candor. They look at each other and say, "I know I'm completely messed up, and you are too, but can we please just try to pull each other out of the mud?" When we find ourselves screaming until our faces are red over some utterly trivial, stupid little thing, we need to pause. You have to fiercely remind yourself that this fight is absolutely not about who dropped a single hair on the bathroom floor. In reality, it is simply two deeply terrified souls desperately screaming for help in the most violently hurtful way possible. We must learn how to instantly transform ourselves into the most seasoned diplomats the very second tensions reach a boiling point. The true brilliance of a diplomat doesn't lie in using the brutal truth to stab the other person, but in gracefully bypassing the heavily fortified psychological trenches they have dug. They take all those jagged, bloody shards of broken glass, mash them into a soft ball of cotton, and gently hand it back over. Right in the middle of your most vicious screaming match, you should take a deep breath and silently ask yourself a question. If I violently rip off this heavy coat of furious anger, what is it that I am truly, deeply terrified of underneath? Perhaps what you are actually terrified of is that if you compromise just this once, they will gradually start to look down on you, and ultimately stop loving you the way they used to. If you can somehow take that bleeding vulnerability and terror hiding right behind your rage and unapologetically lay it bare in front of your partner, magic happens. This seemingly to the death warfare will instantly metamorphose into a profound act of mutual salvation between two deeply wounded children. This is quite simply the warmest, most comforting answer we could possibly find within this utterly absurd theater production called life. Go ahead and look your deepest fears right in the eye. Try your hardest to embrace your deeply flawed self and the deeply flawed people around you, because that is the only indestructible fortress we have against the storms of reality. I am Raymond Shadow, and I want to thank you for watching my show on philosophy and psychology. Please like and subscribe, as it truly means the world to me. I look forward to seeing you all next time.